It's 11 minutes past 6. I'll be back at 6:30. Here's Penny.
Thanks very much, Amanda. And just to reiterate, those are the front pages of all the newspapers that you're waking up to this morning. Oh my God, not again. The plane crash in New York. And the same on the Mirror, same city, same airline, same time. Coincidence or bin Laden? Well, flight 587 took off from New York's JFK airport at 13 minutes past 9. 3 minutes later, houses on the ground in the Queens area of the city were engulfed in a fireball. The crash killed all 255 passengers and crew, and up to 8 other people are missing. So, what happened? David Deese is a former spokesman with the Air Accident Investigation Unit. He joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
From what we've seen so far, what do you think?
It looks like a tragic accident, and I think this is the way that the authorities in America are approaching it. Obviously, with the events of September 11th, everybody starts off fearing the worst and saying, oh, as Lord Mayor Giuliani said, not again, you know. But it looks like a tragic accident.
Now, what do you think could have happened then? Because I thought that the way that the engines were actually hung on, they were designed that if it was an explosion, they actually dropped off and the plane would fly on one engine.
Well, that's the theory. These aircraft are capable of flying on great distances on one engine. Immediately after takeoff is always a fairly critical time in any flight because you're at full power and you're climbing and the margins are far smaller. It can happen that even though the engine does drop off, the hydraulic systems are interrupted, and that would cause the pilot to lose control of the aircraft, his ability to control it, because the controls are hydraulically operated. If you had a catastrophic failure and lost your hydraulic power, you'd lose your ability to control the aircraft. Because
there was a crash, wasn't there, in the 70s, I believe, where it was discovered that the mechanics had actually put the engine on in the wrong way.
Yes, this has happened before. I mean, it's not unusual. It's not unusual for engines to drop off because, you say, they are designed to do so in certain circumstances.
What about the idea of terrorism then?
You can't rule it out and you can't rule it in, as they say, but the initial impressions are that you're talking about a catastrophic accident rather than terrorism.
And the pilot would have had little time to do anything, you're saying, because of the fact that everything would have been at full pelt.
That's right. They're all trained to fly aircraft on one engines, even at takeoff. But if you then lose your control systems as well, it's extremely difficult to control the aircraft.
What about this Airbus itself, the Airbus A300?
It's the original Airbus, which came out, I think, in the late 60s. It's got a good track record. This wasn't one of the fly-by-wire ones, one of the ones that was flown by computers, in effect. This was an old manual systems, as you said, mechanical systems, so you can rule out the sort of multiple failures of computers. It's a direct, manually controlled aircraft.
So it looks more and more like it could actually just have been catastrophic failure, mechanical failure. Would that all, if they found the black box, would that actually clear that up?
It would help. I think they have found the cockpit voice recorder, which obviously helps because they can hear what the pilots were saying and how they were reacting to the problems that they were facing. If they can find the other flight data recorder, this is a very useful tool to help confirm or deny other theories that may come up as a result of inspecting the wreckage.
David East, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
So what about the implications for the economy here in the UK? Well, Henk Potts joins us now from the City of London. Henk, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you think the markets will do this morning?
I think we should recoup some of those losses we saw yesterday. Monday was a rather dull day until around about 2:30 when the news flashed onto our screens. The markets plunged 178 points, but towards the end we did recoup some of those losses, finishing down 98 points. But you only have to look at Wall Street. They were significantly down, and the Nasdaq even got back into positive territory. So I think the market was worried. They were trying to price in whether this was another terrorist attack. We've always said that's the risk in this market. Another terrorist attack would be absolutely disastrous for it. But it's looking very much like it's a tragic rather than sinister accident, and therefore I think the markets will recoup some of those losses this morning.
Nevertheless, the airline industry and I suspect insurance are going to struggle a bit, aren't they?
Yeah, they're the ones. Of course, there's going to be ramifications for certain sectors. British Airways were off 6.5% yesterday. That is an airline that's struggling already. Consumer confidence very weak in that. Americans will not want to get onto planes. It's another blow to what is another struggling part of the economy. So it's difficult coming forward. Remember, British Airways, 40% of their business is that transatlantic route. So look for pressure on them. Rolls-Royce should be off. British Airports Authority, they're going to continue to struggle. Then look to see what's affected after that. You go into the tourism industry, hotels are going to suffer, and also perhaps some retailers coming under a bit more pressure, certainly the luxury side.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the high street, because I was reading a piece the other day saying that really it's only London that suffered from a break in consumer spending. The rest of the country has been performing fairly normally. Now, do you think that's going to change after yesterday?
Certainly, the reason why London's been suffering is because we haven't had the same amount of tourists from the States and from Japan coming through. So that is a big problem for them, and that's likely to deteriorate, I would suggest. Consumer confidence, consumer spending has been the one thing that's kept the global economy, the US and the UK economy, from falling into deep recession. Further deterioration in the main centre of London would be very bad news, I think, for the economy.
Got to leave it there, Hank. Thanks very much indeed.
You're watching the News Hour on GMTV. This morning's headlines. Overnight, the Northern Alliance has moved into the Afghan capital of Kabul. Taliban troops deserted the city as they moved in.
Their invasion came just hours after Tony Blair said he believed the Northern Alliance would respect coalition calls not to enter the city.
And investigators are continuing to search through the wreckage for clues as to why a passenger jet crashed in New York, killing all those on board.
The Taliban are unravelling, but the war against terror is far from over. The words of Tony Blair at last night's address at the Lord Mayor's banquet.
The dragon's teeth of terrorism are planted in the fertile soil of wrongs unrighted, so we should grasp the moment and move, not let our world slip back into rigidity. First, the Middle East peace process must be restarted. I believe that the time has come for the voices of mainstream Islam to take on the extremists.
Well, the Prime Minister also expanded on the theme he outlined at the Labour Party conference, calling for a new world order to bring everyone together and, as you heard there, a new initiative to achieve peace in the Middle East. Well, joining us now is Kirsty Walker, political correspondent of the Express newspaper. Kirsty, good morning to you. Some would say that was an adventurous theme, this return to a new world order and making sure that these alliances stay firm, and some would say it's a rather dangerous territory for Tony Blair too.
Well, it's definitely very ambitious territory, and in this speech he mentioned something like 17 different foreign countries, and he's gone on a real sort of round-the-world trip on how to solve all the world's problems, ranging from the Middle East, as shown in your clip, to even solving poverty in Africa, and it's very, very ambitious. But yet he's making no apology for that. Prime Minister is saying that you may call me an optimist, you may call me a realist, but actually this is something we have to do. Countries have to work together to create a better future for our children.
Yeah, it's getting plaudits on the international stage. I mean, he's being recognised now as a world statesman and a very good at the job of shuttle diplomacy. But doesn't he run the risk of being accused of neglecting the home market, as it were, and neglecting domestic matters here?
Yeah, well, the Daily Express, among others, are starting to question how the Prime Minister spent the last 2 months out of the country, hardly focused on the domestic agenda at all. Actually, he's quite, he does address that in his speech last night, slight element of defensiveness. This is traditionally a foreign affairs speech, and towards the end of the speech, he actually focuses in on the domestic agenda and very much ties in why this new world order is very important for Britain as a whole, why it's important for our security, our economy, our jobs, our very livelihoods.
Fair point. Let's just have a look at how he's holding up to all this, because, I mean, let's face it, he is travelling miles and miles and miles and working very, very long hours indeed. I mean, I was with him on a train down to Bristol the other day, and by that evening he was in Damascus, and that's been typical of his day so far. And we've got some illustration of how he's changed. I mean, there he is, all fresh-faced and summery with Cherie, but not so much anymore. As those pictures progress, we see increasing tiredness, don't we?
Well,
there we have him again, you see. What do you make? How do you think he's holding up?
well, the Prime Minister, I think, would like to think that he's Superman flying around the world, rescuing the planet from all sorts of troubles, but actually he is just a mere mortal, as indeed you and I are, and he is starting to look very tired. He's also, I think, lost a little bit of weight, slightly loose around the collar now, some of his shirts, and I don't think we should worry too much, though. I think he can look after himself.
Fairly stoic. Kirsty, thanks very much indeed for being with us.
The time is 20 minutes past 6. Now we return to the crash in New York. One more tragedy for the Americans, particularly for the New Yorkers, still burying their dead from the attacks on the Twin Towers. Well, family counsellor Dr. Audrey Wise joins us now from New York. Good morning to you. What was your first reaction?
Good morning. Well, the first thing that I thought of was, oh no. And I guess in speaking today to a lot of people, that was their reaction also. Everybody for that split second was suddenly saying, oh no, not again. And it was almost a sense of relief in a perverse manner that we thought, well, it was a regular airplane incident or an airplane crash.
Now, I was reading one of the comments in today's newspapers, a woman who actually grew up there in Queens, who says even the devout among New Yorkers may now be wondering if they've been cast out utterly from the protection of a benign God. Do you think that's a common thought?
Well, I think people are really being tested to the hilt, and that's what's really troubling them. Let's face it, first there was destruction in our financial center of the city, and now there's destruction in the residential area of the city. How much more can you push people, especially in an area where people have already suffered great losses, particularly with the World Trade Center? Even today, the mayor was saying that in a church right near the crash today, he had already attended 10 funerals in the church that's right near the crash site today. And now people are going to have to go back and grieve for some more losses.
Exactly, and this is where many firefighters had lived, those who lost their lives in the World Trade Center. Had people been heeding George Bush's appeal for them to try to get back to normal?
Well, people have been trying, but there's a general sense of nervousness. I mean, after all, if you take one of the subways locally in Manhattan and they tell you that they're going to be checking for anthrax, that will give people a sense of nervousness. You also have a general nervousness and in some instances a sense of hopelessness because people have lost jobs. They've lost, apart from losing loved ones, they've lost jobs. And very often when people feel hopeless and helpless, they once again, if they were sort of, would turn to the bottle. Some people may now once again be turning to drugs and alcohol. So people find comfort in all kinds of ways. People are also turning to food, particularly comfort food, in a way that they hadn't before September 11th.
How do you think this will make them feel about the war?
Well, it depends on your perspective. It's partially ideological and it's partially what you really believe is right. I mean, people are split down the middle, but for the most part, people really are supporting the president.
Now, and finally, I mean, the airlines must be wondering how on earth they can possibly recover from this. What do you think it will take to make people feel that they should get back on planes?
Well, I think before September 11th, the airlines in general, I don't know how good they were doing or how well they were doing, rather, but now people may, even today you had people who said, I'm going to go back on an airplane tomorrow, but people who weren't on that airplane may really think twice, particularly with the holidays. People may be getting into their cars now, or at least meeting people halfway across the country instead of flying out to the West Coast and vice versa.
Audrey Wise, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
24
Thank
minutes
you.
past 6 of the time. After the break, Claire's here with the weather and we'll be returning to New York and the search for answers. What did bring down Flight 587? Was it mechanical failure or something more sinister?
And Kabul falls to the Northern Alliance, and we're live to Afghanistan.
And we meet the woman who wanted to slim and thought she'd discovered a pill that was quick-acting and safe.
I would say it was more the benefits that got discussed, not the dangers or anything like that.
We look at the dangers of slimming pills, banned in Britain but still available through the internet.
Work, you're right.
He's still a bit of an old philanderer.
Well, it's never written that way, it's just we fancy doing it.
Really? Well, completely naked.
My name is Frost, Detective Inspector Frost.
If there's one thing guaranteed to get under his skin,
I'm investigating the death of a police officer.
it's murder.
What are you looking at? You didn't do it in self-defense.
Why are you doing this to me?
Because it's my job.
Don't worry.
Jack.
He'll soon have it all under control. Hopefully. A Touch of Frost, tonight at 9, ITV1.
We screamed for him in the 70s. Will his comeback make us scream for more? David Cassidy, Friday on GMTV.
Roses growing round a doorway, summer breezes, flying kites. Of many things I am reminded when I sniff my woolly tights.
Good morning. Now, for the next day or so, it's likely to be very cold indeed, particularly at night, but even by day, a cold, raw wind. Despite the fact we do have high pressure in charge coming in from the west here, but the winds are now coming across from the north. It's going to bring some wintry showers, particularly to eastern areas. And as I said, it's going to feel very cold outside. But the cold snap's not going to last towards the end of the week. Milder conditions coming in. For this morning, most places will be bright with some sunshine. The clouds across the far southwest gradually breaking up. We will see some brightness here, but look at that across the eastern side of the country. That's where we're likely to see some wintry showers through this morning into this afternoon. Now, later on the day, more clouds will be moving in across more western areas of Scotland, and that's going to bring some rain or sleet, perhaps some snow over the higher ground. The showers then will ease across northeastern parts of England as well as eastern areas of Scotland, but elsewhere, particularly East Anglia in the southeast, they will persist throughout the day. But for Wales and the West Country and western parts of England, it's going to be a fine end to the day, despite the fact, as I said, a very chilly day indeed. Now, the reason why it's chilly is because with the wind coming in from the north, it's actually going to bring some wintry showers to that eastern coast there. But inland, as I said, despite we will have a cold wind, it is going to be bright here. The wind, as I said, coming in, and it's going to be a very strong wind, a raw feel to the day, and temperatures really struggling. Now, Cardiff yesterday reached 15 Celsius, today only 8 degrees. That's 46 degrees Fahrenheit. And across Scotland there, really struggling to get above 5. Tomorrow, a similar situation. Watch out for a hard frost tonight. Let's have a look at the summary then, where wintry showers across eastern areas, elsewhere dry, cold and bright.
Thank you very much, Claire. Good morning. It's 6:27 on Tuesday, the 13th of November. I'm Penny Smith.
And I'm John Stapleton. You're watching the News Hour here on GMTV. The breaking news you're waking up to this morning is that the Northern Alliance has entered Kabul in defiance of George Bush and Mr. Blair.
And the recovery of bodies continues in New York following yesterday's Airbus crash.
There have been dramatic developments in Afghanistan overnight as the Northern Alliance moved into the capital city, Kabul, going against the wishes of both Tony Blair and President Bush. Hundreds of Taliban troops were seen fleeing the city as opposition forces armed with rifles and rocket launchers moved in. For the latest, we're joined by our correspondent Lara Logan, who's with Northern Alliance forces just north of Kabul. Lara, good morning to you once again. What can you tell us about the situation in Kabul? Does it appear that the Northern Alliance are in complete control there?
Well, it's difficult to say if they're in complete control, but certainly all reports are indicating that they didn't face any resistance inside the city at all, and very little coming in. They were armed, as you mentioned, but they didn't appear to need those arms very much. The streets now are said to be empty of Taliban soldiers, and they were seen fleeing in convoys of vehicles going south throughout the night. What we're hearing is that residents of Kabul have come out onto the streets. They've been hooting their car horns. They've been ringing bicycle bells, celebrating and whispering to each other. Is it really true? Can they really have gone? Have the Taliban really left? The Northern Alliance, apparently there was some sporadic small arms fire that could be heard from the hills around the capital, and that was said to be them celebrating their return. But one worrying development is that the case of 8 foreign aid workers, including 2 Americans, who were being held prisoner by the Taliban, accused of trying to spread Christianity. Now, shortly before the September 11th attacks, their families were making some progress in trying to release them. And now the Taliban are said to have taken those 8 foreign aid workers with them when they fled the city.
Yes. Now, the Northern Alliance forces seem more or less in control of the north of the country, but there's a lot of that country left to gain, isn't there?
Well, there is a lot of the country left again. I mean, we have heard that they've now captured Sarang, a province in the southwest, and yesterday they took complete control of a very important province, Herat, in the north of the country. Certainly, they've had a series of stunning military victories over the last couple of days, But those reports of the Taliban heading south, no doubt, for the city of Kandahar, which is a known stronghold of the Taliban, and there's also the eastern city of Jalalabad, a stronghold of Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda network. Those areas of the country remain under their control. And in fact, Taliban commanders here that I spoke to on the front line this morning, I've been inside their trenches, seeing the places that have been captured, talking to soldiers who surrendered, and seeing the bodies of those who chose not to surrender and chose to fight. And what they've been saying to me here is that there are no Al-Qaeda supporters left in this area. Those are bin Laden's terrorist network, that they have all fled south to Kandahar, and they believe that is where Osama bin Laden himself is located, although they don't have any way to confirm this absolutely.
OK, I've got to leave it there for the time being, Laura. Thank you very much indeed.
And from Afghanistan, we go to New York, and this is the scene just 16 hours after Flight 587 came down in the Queens area of New York. Those are live shots there. Our correspondent Helen Morton is at the scene. Helen, good morning. Obviously, the first question on everybody's lips was this terrorism? But at the moment, we are no nearer to finding out what caused the crash, are we?
Good morning, Penny. Well, we do understand that preliminary evidence suggests that this was a mechanical failure rather than a terrorist attack. And investigators here, you're actually looking at the scene now. We're just a couple of blocks away from the scene, is where investigators are working through the night. They're sifting through the wreckage and searching for further clues, because apparently the wreckage of the plane will give investigators clues as to what happened in those few moments before the plane actually crashed. Tests are being carried out here at the scene for any signs of explosives. We understand at this stage no explosives have been found there, though. One of the flight data boxes has been found. It's been examined in Washington, and it seems to suggest that there were no emergency calls by the pilots prior to this crash. Rescue workers obviously have been working around the clock since this happened, recovering bodies from the scene, and I caught up with one of the firemen who was actually on the scene just minutes after the plane crashed.
I got there like 10 minutes after it went down, and there were like 6 houses of fire, like 6 houses fully involved with fire. And so we just stretched hose lines, put out all the fire, went out relatively fast. Apparently most of the fuel and the wing went into the bay, so there wasn't as much fire as we would anticipate. So the fire went out relatively quick. Now it's just a recovery of hundreds of bodies.
And you're talking to firefighters, of course, in this particular area, a place where many firefighters who lost their lives in the Twin Towers lived. What's been the reaction of the community there?
Well, Penny, the whole community here is still reeling from events of September the 11th because they suffered very, very heavy losses here. 100 people from this neighbourhood died on September the 11th in the World Trade Center collapse. Many of them were firefighters, many of them were police officers, and a few of them were Wall Street employees. And one thing that surprised me coming to this neighbourhood, Penny, you can actually see from here the Manhattan skyline. So they live here with a constant reminder of what happened on September the 11th. And now, for the relatives to see this sort of thing happen, the smoke billowing in the air, a plane crashing, it must just make those memories so painful. And of course those memories are so raw. It's only 2 months and 1 day after September the 11th. And in fact, when Mayor Giuliani, the mayor of New York City, heard about the crash, he realized that he'd actually been to 10 memorial services in this neighborhood. So it really has come as a particularly hard blow to the people that live here. And I'm sure over the coming days we're going to hear many tragic stories of people who had family and loved ones involved in both of these disasters.
Helen, thanks very much for the moment.
It's 26 minutes to 7. The rest of the news now with Amanda.
Thank you, John. Good morning. The Northern Alliance's capture of the Afghan capital, Kabul, came just hours after Tony Blair said he believed they would respect the coalition's request not to enter the city. Well, Sue Jameson is in Downing Street. Morning, Sue. So Mr. Blair was obviously wrong. What do you think the government's response to this invasion is going to be?
Well, there's been no official response yet, but I think an awful lot's going to depend on what happens in the next 24 hours. Right the way through this campaign, the government here has said that it's obviously a military initiative, but also a diplomatic one. and they have spoken right the way through of what happens post-conflict, what happens to rebuild Afghanistan. They might be a little encouraged by the fact that it seems to be the Taliban fleeing, the Northern Alliance forces going in, but leaving perhaps the heavy armoury and so on the outskirts of the city, as they were asked to do, although what happens next we just don't know. But certainly they're going to want to try and see if they can still negotiate with the Northern Alliance, because they do not want to see the Northern Alliance just sweeping right the way through because of the Pashtun area in the south. They think this would just leave open the way to further civil war. And Tony Blair, in his very wide-ranging foreign affairs speech last night at Mansion House, was talking about a whole new interventionist role for the West, saying that the good life in the West is over now. We have to intervene in these conflicts. The Middle East, he obviously mentioned again, in order to ensure that conflicts in some areas of the world do not then spill over into the West. And I think that's what we're going to be hearing from him and, in fact, other Western leaders during the rest of today.
Sue, many thanks. In other news now, the death toll in the worst floods in Algeria for 40 years has risen to nearly 600 people. Nearly all the deaths have been in the capital Tangiers, which saw buildings swept away in the floods. The government has declared 3 days of public mourning from today. The trial of the man accused of murdering Sarah Payne begins today. 42-year-old Roy Whiting denies murdering the schoolgirl in July last year. 80-year-old Sarah disappeared while playing with her brothers and sister near her grandparents' home in West Sussex. Transport Secretary Stephen Byers will be grilled in the Commons today over his handling of the Railtrack affair. It's emerged that the network operator is considering taking legal action against Mr Byers, accusing him of abusing his power by preventing the rail regulator from bailing out Railtrack. 6:36 is the time. That's it from me now. It's news, weather and travel where you are this morning.
Good morning from the Granada News Centre. Flights from the northwest are returning to normal this morning following yesterday's plane crash in America. Manchester Airport is advising passengers flying out to the States to check in as normal, but to stay in touch with their tour operators. 2 planes, which are due in from New York, are expected to land on time. The disaster has further compounded the problems in the region's aviation industry. Some experts fear it may lead to further job losses.
The potential is that as public opinion hardens against the industry, that those businesses that support air travel are going to be hard hit if passengers decide to stay at home rather than travel.
Greater Manchester Police are continuing their hunt for a gang of 5 men after a teenage girl was abducted and raped and her friend indecently assaulted. The 2 14-year-old girls were forced into a car while walking in Whitehall Street in Rochdale. They were made to crouch in the rear footwell and taken on a journey lasting several hours. The car eventually stopped in the Healy Dell area of the town, where one youngster was raped and the other indecently assaulted. Liverpool police are carrying out house-to-house inquiries following the discovery of a man's body on the outskirts of the city. Officers made the grim discovery at an address in the Faulkner Square area of the city after receiving a phone call from concerned relatives. Results of a post-mortem examination will be released later this morning. The European Court of Justice will announce today whether it plans to continue legal action against the UK over the cleanliness of its bathing waters. Only last week, the Environment Agency announced the North West had turned the tide on its failing water quality. The entire filed coast, including Blackpool, had met tough EU standards. The case against the UK is based on tests taken in 1996. The court has said that the recent improvements won't be taken into account. Time to look at what's happening on the region's roads this morning. Well, in Greater Manchester, the usual delays on the M60 between junction 11 at Eccles and up to Worsley. In Cheshire, there are delays on the M62 around the Winwick interchange at junction 9. In Lancashire, the A59 Liverpool Road has lane closures between Tarleton and Penwitham, and on Merseyside, delays continue on Speke Hall Road in Liverpool. I'll be back with more news in half an hour. Let's take a look at today's weather.
The weather in your region with Vinos.
It'll be a cool start to the day, but there'll be some sunny spells during the morning, and it'll stay dry this afternoon with further sunny intervals. However, it'll feel bitterly cold with highs of just 6 Celsius, that's 43 degrees Fahrenheit, in the brisk north to northwesterly winds.
21 minutes to 7. Welcome back to the News Hour here on GMTV. Quick look at the morning papers. No surprise to say that all the front pages reflecting the disaster in New York. Coincidence or bin Laden, the Mirror headline there. The Sun says Ground Zero 2, and underneath that, Alliance 2 miles from Kabul. Of course, it was when the Sun was printed, but now, of course, we know that those Alliance troops are indeed in the city of Kabul.
Yes, to that breaking overnight news, Northern Alliance troops have entered Kabul, a development which may dramatically change the power base there and the future of the war. The Northern Alliance now holds virtually all of northern Afghanistan after dramatic gains of the past few days. And to discuss how this affects the future of the war is Professor Chris Bellamy, Director of Security Studies at Cranfield University. Good morning. First of all, the speed at which this has suddenly moved has been quite breathtaking, hasn't it?
Quite breathtaking, remarkable and totally unexpected, not least, of course, by Tony Blair and George Bush, who asked the Northern Alliance to stay out of the city of Kabul while they tried to work out who was going to run the country in the future. What seems to have happened is that the Taliban have actually pulled out of Kabul, leaving a kind of power vacuum, and in that situation the Northern Alliance have very understandably moved in.
But presumably the Taliban merely biding their time until they mount a counterattack.
Absolutely. The rapid fall of the northern part of Afghanistan so far, of course, is in territory which is not Pushtun, which is not the majority tribe in Afghanistan. They're Azeri, Uzbeks, Tajiks, and so on. And those are the people who make up the Northern Alliance. So far with Mazar-e-Sharif and indeed Kabul, the Northern Alliance have been seizing friendly territory. The Pushtun area and the Taliban area is to the south, and the Taliban strongholds, of course, are Kandahar and Jalalabad. So what we could see, and what we don't want to see, but what we could see in the future is a kind of split of Afghanistan, with the Northern Alliance holding the north, and the Taliban still very well dug in the south.
And at the moment, the reason why President Bush didn't want the Northern Alliance take Kabul, as you said, is because they wanted a power sharing, as it were. The problem is, now the Northern Alliance are in there, does that mean that the US has a big diplomatic problem on its hands?
Well, I think the focus is going to shift to the United Nations, where work is going to be underway at high speed to try and bring together representatives of all the peoples of Afghanistan. But the problem here is, of course, that the biggest element are the Pashtuns, whom the Taliban represent. So they've really got to start talking to the Taliban.
Do you think the United States has been justified in backing the Northern Alliance?
There's an old saying, my enemy's enemy is my friend, and while the Taliban were firmly in charge and protecting Osama bin Laden, then for want of a better strategy, they were. But the Northern Alliance are not exactly angels. One of the roles, I think, of those special forces accompanying with them, it will be to try and persuade them not to carry out revenge attacks and atrocities, which they have done in the past. So you can be sure that those American and probably British advisors are going to be saying, you know, whatever you do, be nice to the people in the areas that you've reoccupied.
But you don't think that they would have tried to persuade them not to go into Kabul? You don't think they were there to say that as well?
I don't think they could have done, really. Once the Northern Alliance realised that the Taliban were pulling out, then it's an opportunity too good to miss, isn't it?
So how do you see this sort of panning out, for example, in the immediate future, in the next few months?
Well, in the immediate future, the first requirement is for somebody to maintain law and order in Kabul, because the Northern Alliance are not that numerous, and cities absorb vast numbers of troops. So I would imagine the situation in Kabul at the moment is pretty almost anarchic. So first of all, there's a requirement for somebody to help maintain law and order there, and that might give rise to a new role, possibly even for British troops, to go in as kind of peacekeepers in Kabul. Secondly, we might see over the winter this split of Afghanistan into these two areas. And thirdly, it's clear from the deaths of those 3 French journalists yesterday that even in areas supposedly controlled by the Northern Alliance, they don't actually control it all. They control the cities and the roads, which is actually exactly the same position that the Russians were in during the 1980s.
Chris Bellamy, thank you.
Long way to go.
Thank you very much.
16 minutes to 7, you're watching the News Hour here on GMTV. These are the headlines you're waking up to this morning. As we've just heard, overnight, the Northern Alliance has taken the Afghan capital of Kabul. It's reported Taliban troops deserted the city as they moved in.
Well, their invasion came just hours after Tony Blair said he believed the Northern Alliance would respect coalition calls not to enter the city.
And investigators are continuing to search through the wreckage for clues as to why a passenger jet crashed in New York, killing all those on board. Well, the travel and tourism industries were already suffering hard times after the terror attacks of September the 11th. Yesterday's events in New York can hardly help. Our correspondent Richard Gaisford is at Heathrow Airport for us this morning. Richard, what's the picture there today?
Well, no major delays here at Heathrow this morning, John, but anyone travelling on a transatlantic route today is being asked to call their airline operator this morning to find out if there are any operational delays, because remember, there were closures of all American airports temporarily yesterday, and of course closures around the New York area as well. So if you are travelling across the Atlantic, do call up, but nothing major to report as we stand this morning.
But serious impact for the tourism industry here in the UK nevertheless.
Absolutely. I mean, the aviation industry as a whole needed a giant shot of confidence after September the 11th, John, and I think really this has done nothing to help, as you've said, and certainly if you look at that industry, you've had 100,000 job losses, you've had airlines going to the wall, Sabina, Ansett, Swiss Air and Travel, others on the brink of bankruptcy as well. They needed something to happen to make people say, I want to get back in a plane, and certainly this is going to do nothing to help in the States, and here in the United Kingdom we are suffering the knock-on effect from the lack of American tourists at the moment. American tourists really aren't coming to major tourist attractions, to hotels, guest houses and the like, and it certainly is a problem. On the flip side, you've got people perhaps wanting to go on holiday. Heathrow here, it's mainly a business market, lots of business people travelling, so we decided to go to Bristol Airport, where perhaps people choose to travel for pleasure, and ask them what they thought about getting back on a plane.
I'd be more than a little nervous about flying at the moment. It was an accident, wasn't it, today, so it doesn't scare me.
No, I won't get on a plane again. No, too scared, definitely. Especially if it's to the United States as well. Wouldn't do it.
We were just deciding to go on holiday during this Christmas period and everything. We were going to decide to go to Spain. But all this has just happened, so it just has to, everything's got to be put on hold now.
I flew back from Italy on my honeymoon a week after September the 11th. No, slightly anxious, but you have to do it.
Richard, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining me now on the sofa, Christine Nicholas from the New York Visitors and Convention Bureau. Christine, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Like you, I was at a travel market in London yesterday, a big exhibition and trade fair, where you were hoping to encourage more and more Britons to visit New York. But as you've seen from those interviews we did down in Bristol yesterday, you've got a battle on your hands, haven't you?
Sure do. We did after September 11th as well, but we got to keep moving forward because tourism is a vital economic engine for New York City. It supports about 280,000 jobs in New York, and it also pumps in about $25 billion into our economy. So that's a very big industry. A lot of people depend on it. So we here at World Travel Mart, we're going to do the best that we can to encourage people to come to New York City.
Hand on heart, you were making a speech yesterday encouraging Britons to go to New York. Then you came off the platform to hear this news. What was your reaction?
Well, it's as if someone, punches you in the stomach, because we've been through so much in New York, and the Rockaways in particular. That this is a community that is a working class community, a lot of police officers, firefighters, people from Cantor Fitzgerald, which is a large investment house that was on the 107th floor of the World Trade Center. A lot of folks from there. They've been under a tremendous amount of pressure from September 11th, so our hearts are out to the people in Rockaway and also to the families that lost loved ones on this recent flight.
I mean, personally, I'd fly to New York tomorrow, but I mean,
I will be flying to New York tomorrow.
Sure, but you can understand people's fears and concerns, can't you?
Absolutely, and people need to feel safe about flying, and there was a need for that before this tragedy, and there's going to be an even greater need now, and we're looking at our federal government to make sure that they take necessary procedures that, will strengthen the security for airports, airlines. This is a need long before September 11th, and we've put it on hold, and then after September 11th, it's much more urgent. And now I think something very drastic is going to have to take place for people to feel comfortable to get on
We've
airplanes.
got to try and help you get Brits over to New
Yes.
York, but you've also got to try and help
Exactly.
us
It's a
get
two-way.
Americans here, because our industry, as Richard was saying, is really being clobbered, and it's particularly the American market that, if I can put it this way, is letting us down.
Well, one of the messages that we wanted to carry with us is to really thank those British visitors. It's the #1 market for New York City. 1.2 million British visitors come to New York City, and they've been wonderful. They've been coming to New York after September 11th, and we really wanted to say thank you for that and also return the favor. That's why we had more people come to World Travel Mart than ever before. We have about 75 participants from New York City right now to carry that message.
Well, let's hope that both ends of that market does eventually recover to its previous levels. Christine, thanks very much indeed for coming in to talk to us. And you'll find the latest helpline information and travel links on the GMTV website. That's gmtv.co.uk. Now then, as you may know, the overnight breaking news is that Northern Alliance forces have actually moved into Kabul, despite President Bush and Mr. Blair asking them not to do so. And joining us on the line now from Islamabad is the journalist Hamid Mir, who is the last reporter to have spoken to Osama bin Laden when the al-Qaeda leader admitted he was responsible for the Twin Towers atrocity. A very good morning to you, sir. First question, obviously, have you any idea where Osama bin Laden is this morning?
I think definitely this morning he is not in Kabul. I think he is far away from Kabul, but definitely he is planning to trap the Northern Alliance forces because during my conversation with him, he gave me some indications that they may leave some big cities of Afghanistan just to attract Northern Alliance forces, that they should come out of their trenches and hideouts, because he said they are just playing chess and volleyball in their hideouts. We want that they should come out in the battlefield, and then we would like to engage them in one-to-one fight. And I think in coming days, we will see that the bin Laden, Al-Qaeda and Taliban, they will be engaged with a one-to-one fight with the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan.
Okay, so we may not have heard the last of the Taliban, is what you're saying. Now, let me ask you one other question. There is still some doubt as to the cause of this tragic accident in New York yesterday. Do you think it possible that Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda movement were responsible for this?
You see, I don't have any evidence, and even the American officials are of the view that they don't have any clue that some terrorists are behind this accident, so I cannot say anything about this event.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Hamid Mir, thank you very much indeed for taking time out to talk to us.
The time is 8 minutes to 7 now. Some people would do almost anything to be thin. Our next guest was so desperate to lose weight that it almost cost her her life, because Louise Craig took a particularly powerful slimming pill called phentermine, and it all went horribly wrong. Louise, good morning to you.
Morning.
Now, first of all, how much weight did you want to lose? Because you're hardly extraordinarily fat, are you? Just, what, a stone or something?
No, about 3 stone.
3 stone?
Yeah.
Right, so, and that was because you were going on holiday?
Yeah.
So you went along to a diet clinic?
Yeah.
And what happened then?
I went along to the diet clinic and I basically just filled out a general information sheet asking my weight, my height and different things. I went in to see the doctor and he just did the same again, took my weight, my height, my blood pressure and told me about some very common side effects and gave me the tablets.
Right, so he gave you this phentermine, which has now, in fact, in the last 6 months, I understand, been banned in Britain. And how did that affect you?
About them being banned? Or
No. When you're taking the tablets, how did they affect you?
I was only taking the tablets for about 4 days, and on the 4th day I started to feel very unwell in the evening. Lucky enough I stayed with my mum and dad. I started to feel flu-like symptoms, headache, nausea, and then as the evening went on, about a couple of hours later, it was very severe side effects. It was like hallucinations, psychosis, split personality, palpitations, my heart rate was very erratic, I couldn't walk, could barely talk to my mum or anything.
Incredible. And then you obviously stopped taking the tablets.
Yeah,
and then how
yeah.
long did it take to clear up all these symptoms?
I actually got taken into the hospital that night and the doctor gave me some diazepam to counteract the drug. So the next morning.
So you decided to take part in a Carlton documentary, and you actually went, did you go back to the same doctor?
No, I actually went through to Glasgow because it was the head office, because they weren't wanting me to go to Falkirk because it had been such public knowledge where I live. So we went through to Glasgow to the head office, and it was just the same again.
And the doctor just went through the same thing and said, you know, here you are, you can have these tablets. Now, Hilary Jones is with us as well. Phentermine, you can actually get it on the internet from the United States, where it is still legal, I understand. I mean, is there anything that this doctor, if it was a GP that Louise had gone to, is there anything that the doctor would have done differently?
Well, you can't prescribe it in Britain anyway.
But could you have done then, before it was banned? Yes,
you could. You could. It was indicated for moderate to severe obesity,
Right.
which has distinct guidelines. Then it should be given with great care, under supervision, with frequent monitoring. Patients should be warned about the possible side effects.
Which Louise says she was warned
which can
about
be
the
very
side
considerable. There's a very long list of them.
Some of them, not all of them, right.
Yeah.